There it is.
Blur my background. Picking your favorite hat today.
Well, okay. So my headphones weren't charged, so I've got my buds in, and which is fine. And except my hat I wore in Columbus and haven't washed it yet, so it's got sweat stains. I normally wear it backwards. So, and I was sick with some other one, same thing. So whatever.
It's only going to be on the internet
Tony.
forever. It doesn't matter.
Well, no. Well, technically, I can delete it at any point. But yes, you're right. The odds of me remembering to do so in any way, shape, or form are pretty slim.
You can't delete things from the internet. It's like peeing in a pool. You can't take it out.
No, but eventually it filters, right? I mean, at some point, that's the objective. I don't know. We're live. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the shit show today. I, of course, am DM Bob Yo, and this is my wonderful co-host and spokesmodel, Tony. How are you, Tony?
I'm just peachy. How are you?
Not bad. So we had Father's Day recently in the last couple of weeks here. You're going to be a father. That's still a thing. Yeah.
I'm counting on it.
Excited about that. So this will be your last year of, not, did Haya get you anything for Father's Day, just as sort of anticipation or?
No, I mean, I don't know if it's superstition or whatever, but let's wait till I'm actually a father,
Fair. No, I'll buy into that. What did I, I had to get this lovely Hydro Flask mug because, here's the thing. I am an adult. I have been for 3 decades, but I prefer to drink out of a plastic tumbler. Like, for whatever reason, unless it's beer I have to have in a glass, but if I'm anything else, soda or whatever, I prefer in a plastic tumbler, doesn't have to have a lid like a sippy cup, but if it did, that would be fine. So my son got me this thinking, and my kids got me this thinking, well, since I'm on a stream and people are watching me drink, that I should not look like, an 8-year-old. So I don't know I don't know how much that's going to help because I'm still going to act like one. So, all right. I am almost sort of organized today. Not really.
Yeah, you didn't even text me. What are we doing today? Seems like you have a plan.
Well, I figured we'd pick up. We'd go with last week's text since I had internet trouble. Figured go back to the questions that I'd put in my Discord, my client Discord. I'd put in, for folks to ask questions, and I've had several. You know what? That's fine. Everybody can know I'm nearly bald. That hat is not going to work today. I should redo this though. It's everywhere now. So I'd put in my Discord, my client Discord. And by the way, if anybody wants access to my Discord, I probably should include it on my socials. I mean, we do have some, just chatting stuff, and people share memes and things like that. It's not strictly just for my clients. I've got a couple hundred folks on there that at one point or another have all been clients. So, I mean, that's the thing that they have in common, but, that it doesn't mean that you have to be a client. So anybody's interested in that, holler. Anyway, I put it out to my clients to say, hey, questions for Ask the DM. So I figured we would just go with that today. How's that sound to you, Tony?
Sounds great.
All right. And then also for some reason, again, due to my amazing technical abilities, we've got a little black line at the bottom of our video windows this week, but I don't give a shit. All right, so here we go. All right, so and this was a fun conversation. My clients had some discussion about it. So, but let's start with one from Eric. Eric is another DM on startplaying.games. If you let me give him a shout out, Eric, if you're listening. As always, appreciate you. I've had the opportunity to work with him in a couple of corporate games. And is the background black? What? Who knows? Wasn't the background always black? No, it's usually got a thing, doesn't it? Like a frame.
A thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, we're ghetto. No, that's classist. We're I don't know.
We're in the void today.
We're in the void today. That's all right. Because people don't tune in. Look, they don't tune in for my receding hairline. They might turn in for your ruggedly good looks, but certainly not my receding hairline and definitely not my technical ability. Anyway, so Eric, hit him up on startplaying.games if you need a DM. He's great. He's also a client. He plays in my Spelljammer games. So his question was, I always hear a lot of talk about balance from one extreme of, for example, to make sure the CRs line up to an exact formula, all the way to, I don't balance. I don't worry about balance as a DM. They interact with whatever's out there and the choice is fight or run. What are your thoughts on the subject? Tony, what are your thoughts on the subject?
I shared a couple of my thoughts in your Discord, but I think balance is important, but it's very hard to get right because it really depends on player group and player build. So there may be an encounter with a particular enemy who, magic would really help. And there's, it's just a bunch of melee attackers, fighter, barbarian, whatever in the group. And, on the flip side, there might be an encounter where they have an anti-magic field and all of a sudden the wizard is using a dagger. And it's like a pretty bad situation. But I have sort of come to the opinion that balance isn't as important as people think it is, because it should kind of be up to the players whether or not to engage. I was just playing some Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a big open world game from, I think, 2017, and it has a mechanic like a lot of games do, where it's open world, you can go anywhere, but some areas are more dangerous than others. So if you encounter an enemy that might be above your pay grade, it has like a little skull on top of it, or there are like not so subtle notices like this is a level 20 quest. And so D&D is the ultimate open world game. And so as long as the DM sort of telegraphs, oh, an ancient red dragon lives in that cave. Do you really want to go in? And the party says, sure. Well, they decided that.
Did they though? I mean, even if the telegraphing is sufficient, I think there's often, and I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, there's often an unwritten social contract between DMs and players, and or maybe assumptions, right, on one side or the other. One of the assumptions is that the DM isn't going to put something that is undefeatable in front of the party. Now, that can be a faulty assumption, right? And it also depends on the meaning of defeat, right? It's either defeatable or escapable, I think, is what Eric is implying in the sort of the one side of the argument.
Yeah. So I think everything should be escapable in a sense, in that you should have the choice not to engage. And certainly the DM tries to balance things in a certain way. But I don't know, as a DM, I really don't want to be telling my players, are you sure you want to do that? Like, you want to use that ability? Maybe it's time for second wind, huh? Because then I'm just playing the game with myself. So, maybe tactically, I would have made some decisions that the players didn't make. And so they made things harder for themselves. I remember being a player in one encounter where the DM sprinkled a bunch of potions all throughout the environment and was describing like glimmering things and whatever. And all the players were just wailing on the boss. And the DM was like, there are potions. We don't want to waste our actions on potions, but the potions were supposed to make the encounter easier.
They probably had an experience like I did with a DM. This is going back to about 2000. It was New Year's Eve. It had to have been New Year's Eve 2001 going into 2002. And so we went over to this other couple, some friends of ours at the time, and they had some other folks over, and we all played. There were like, I don't know, DM and probably seven players, and we we're playing D&D, and I was fairly new to third edition, and I'd only played with this DM a couple times. But it was a one shot, and it was higher level. I don't know, 10th level maybe. So anyway. So we come through a portal, and the ground is littered with magic items. And so, not having had much experience with this particular dungeon master, my character reached down, and he was a wizard, and there was a staff, and I so what does it look like? And I cast detect magic on it, and I got pretty powerful auras, not necromantic auras, mind you, just auras. I forget what of various sorts. Like it was maybe like a staff of power or something. I'm like, okay, cool. The DM has decided to give us each a cool item, right, for the upcoming fight. So I picked it up, and he said, "Make a Constitution saving throw," and I did, and I failed the Constitution saving throw. And he said, "Okay, you're dead." And this was at about 8:30 at night on New Year's Eve. So for the next 3.5 hours, I watched everybody else play D&D. So maybe it was that kind of thing where the players had a previous bad experience. Side note,
that's pretty not fair.
Well, I mean, this particular DM was never concerned with fairness, and that's, again, no wrong way to play the game, but I didn't know that at the time, right? So part of the point being, I think some of those questions about game balance and encounter balance, especially, go back to player expectations or I hate to put the onus just on the player, right? I want to say it's the unwritten social contract, an often unspoken social contract. And I think it has to become spoken. A good DM at the beginning, even if whether it's a one shot or a campaign, will at least make a statement that says, hey, not every encounter is beatable. Sometimes the only way to survive is for you to avoid or run. And and also save or die. I'm going to have a save or die. I'm going to have a save or die encounter in the first hour of play. So I think some of those things. I think it's on both the DM and the player to sort of establish those things, and we don't do a great job necessarily. D&D players, and this is changing, but historically we don't have a great track record of that kind of open communication. because we just want to jump in and start rolling dice. Sometimes I think. I mean, so there's the question of is game balance, is it beneficial? I guess, right? Do you see any genuine use for it? I mean, is it just in the DM prep side that it's useful, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, if you're going to have combat and not just run away from everything, which is kind of the game,
Right?
then the encounter has to be balanced. Otherwise, it's either not winnable or trivial, and both are
Yeah.
kind of bad. I mean, some players, and honestly, myself included, love obliterating an encounter, like just blowing through it,
Not you.
and
No, I.
like killing the purple worm in one round is satisfying to me.
Yeah, I bet it was. Eric, how are you? By the way, we were just talking about you. Your ears must have been itching.
But yeah, unwinnable encounters, I don't know. I don't think are very fun.
Yeah,
And
I
so
mean,
you at least have to make an attempt. I guess that's part of the social contract, is make an attempt. And um maybe the DM also offers a way out, even mid encounter. Could offer that. Um like in the case of your example, you cast detect magic, assuming the DM cared that you continue to play, and that's, I would think that the DM wants everybody to play for the evening. That would be a perfect opportunity for the DM to say, you're getting, this isn't a normal magic item, is something's off. Certainly
you would,
within
yeah,
the bounds of detect magic.
yeah, yes, that is an assumption. That is not always the correct assumption. And again, no wrong way to play the game as long as that's communicated. I wouldn't have had a problem with the facing the consequences of my apparently my dumb choice. If I had any kind of reason to think that it was dumb, other than, well, nobody just finds magic items lying around on the other side of the portal. Well, you know what? It wasn't like it was a commonly used portal. It was something that we had to find, and we were brought there as champions from the world to sort of defeat whatever great evil it was. I mean,
Yeah, there could be magic items on. It's just like what you said. It's entirely reasonable to find a cache of magic items before an encounter, like from the
yeah,
prior adventurers who perished, whatever.
exactly. I mean, to be fair, the ground was littered with them, so I didn't think we were going to get all of them necessarily. But it'd been nice to get an item, or at least not literally die.
Or, maybe
Yeah,
if that were and the DM knew it was a possibility for sure. He didn't just on the fly decide that the item killed you. He planned that ahead of time. Maybe the DM could have said, have a backup character or two ready if you're interested in playing the entire night.
yeah. I mean, other than my wife and I, everyone else had previously played with the DM, and so they kind of knew what they were getting into. So I
Don't.
mean, I think it's part of what that boils down to. But okay,
I
yeah.
heard another anecdote about a DM who would just curse every magic item, and eventually the party just stopped picking up magic items, and the DM got
Right.
annoyed. But can you really blame them when you're like punishing them for interacting with your environment?
No, I mean, you could do that if you're cursed magic items, if it's an interesting thing, right? And it varies, and there are, sort of, they're not like punitive, like they change your hair color, or I don't know, just
I mean,
curses that aren't necessarily debilitating.
and there are cursed items all over the source books that have upsides.
Yeah.
Like the Berserker's Axe, whatever, is a cursed item that has a downside, but it also has an upside.
Well, I had a player in my Sunday we level 20 game who had as a wish, or he decided to buy a shield of missile attraction because he was the paladin and his thing is protecting the party. So I get that. Yeah, I mean, I guess my take on balance is it's informed by playing through the editions for me, because we talked about in the 90s, we would talk about this kit, right? A kit was sort of think of it as both a specialty choice, like rogue and arcane trickster, or your school of magic. So it was a combination of that and sort of background. So it give you certain skills and whatnot. Anyway, and we'd say that these kits, the particular kit, was broken. And we'd always talk about this or that being broken. But as I've said many times before, pre-modern D&D, there was no underlying mathematical system. So technically, there was nothing to break. And everything is just sort of what it was. And some things were really good and some things were really bad, but that's intentional. That's the way the system worked. Third edition, we start to see an attempt at balance. But again, said this before many times too, power differential between an optimized and a non-optimized character is easily 300 to 400%. Fourth edition, they built a mathematical system that worked. And it's part of what I think turned folks off at the time is because the mathematical system worked. And yeah, you customize your character, but optimizing was going to give you maybe a 30 to 40% power differential, not 300 or 400. And then fifth edition, I think the core math up through about the middle of tier 3, so the early teens levels, it's somewhere between third and fourth, maybe 100 or 150% power differential. So that's the real question, right? With balanced encounters is the whole concept assumes system math that's reliable, which it more or less is in fifth edition. Certainly more than it was in pre-modern D&D because there was no system. Definitely more than third, not as much as fourth, but it's usable. After mid-tier 3, things go just off the rails, and it's entirely at that point art. There's very little science to it. So yeah, we also used to talk about the other type of balance that we talked about, and this one doesn't get talked about very much these days, which I think is probably indicative of the changing demographic of the client base. We used to talk about balance between classes. Like the wizard is a much more powerful class in higher levels, for example, than the fighter. And that was on purpose in early editions of D&D. But then in modern D&D, they've tried to sort of balance it so that a first level wizard is still interesting and just as interesting to play as a first level fighter. And then at higher levels, the goal anyway was that, there's some continuity, between them as far as their power levels. Might be in different ways, right? It may not be raw damage output, but and I don't hear about that as much these days. We certainly divide the classes into tiers, and we say, Ranger is a lot of people don't like the Ranger class, right? They say that one's not especially good. Twilight Cleric is, we'll bring that word back, broken. But there's not as much talk about that as there was back in the day. Because I don't think folks in the game these days are as concerned about how they compare to another player, as long as they have their niche. niche. As long as they have their thing that they can do and do well, it doesn't really matter. Matter of fact, they're happy to see the rogue, do a couple hundred points of damage, and they're just fine with the Twilight Cleric taking care of all the healing, as long as they can do their battlefield control or area of effect or whatever it is they're into. So what do you think about balance between the classes?
I actually think the classes are pretty well balanced. And people still talk about the Ranger, although, the Ranger was completely rewritten in Tasha's. Oh, every class got some extra. And like, no, the Ranger got replacement features. No other class got replacement features. And it actually works quite well. I sort of equate the Ranger to the fighter at this point. A sort of well-rounded, good at stuff, and a half caster, which is pretty good. Like that's versus the Eldritch Knight, which is one of the best fighters, is a third caster.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm not, I think there's more of a differential between like common builds. So like the Polearm Master Sentinel, usually Paladin, like Vengeance Paladin with Polearm Master and Sentinel, is an extremely strong, the strongest martial class I can think of. I mean, also the Hexblade Paladin. So this is, that combination allows you to fully invest in charisma without a huge investment in strength, which is very min-maxy and good.
Yeah, I mean, optimization is still a thing, right? I mean, but you optimize for your character for what they can do, and it's not like you're not comparing your character with other players, other characters, as much as you're comparing your character with what your character could be with different choices. It's sort of how I see it. There's much less. I mean, and there it's still there, right? Even like in our Thursday game, without a doubt, with that crazy cool bow that Amali has, she's going to be dealing significant damage and probably will for a long time be one of the heaviest damage dealers because of that. And there are bragging rights to that, but it's not, I don't see the intensity, at least among players that I used to see years ago.
Yeah, and there's other players can sort of share in that. Like when I cast haste on Amali, I'm effectively doubling her damage output. And I'm taking credit for that.
Right.
No, I did that.
Yeah, synergy, right? I mean, a group synergy is a pretty important thing. And I think it's something that we're becoming more and more aware and cognizant of. Fourth edition really brought that to the forefront because the four roles really complemented each other so well in 4E, and fifth maintained some of that. All right. So all right. So Eric's other question, we'll continue with his. Actually, I want to skip to one of Matt's questions. Matt, who's in the Underdark game. Matt asks, when a player has to take an extended absence, how do you handle that? And is there a difference in how you handle it, whether you're as a professional DM, working DM, or versus private or recreation? Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I've had a pretty good track record with in terms of recreational or private D&D games over the years that in which my players have always been really good about, if they know that they're not going to be able to show, they bow out and they tell me we'll be back at a certain time, and we might, maybe we'll have someone come in temporarily. Maybe they're just gone. Maybe it's more up in the air. And they're like, well, when I get back, let's see how long it takes me to get settled and if my schedule changed or whatever. So I think in a casual game, a game among friends, that's more about your group dynamic as friends. And it's a similar question as what you might ask with, well, I constantly invite Bob to when we go out for drinks on a Friday night, and he always says no. At what point do you stop asking? And I can't answer those questions for people as far as how you interact with your friends. I personally, generally speaking, I'm going to keep inviting because because with friends there's 1,000 reasons they might keep saying no, and almost none of them have to do with me. It's the way I see it. People got their own stuff. It's not like they're avoiding. If you feel like your friends are avoiding you, talk to your therapist, right? I'm not your professional DM. And I recommend talking to your therapist about it. Absolutely. I think everybody should have a therapist. Anyway, I know I do. Yeah, I mean, have you had that at all in any of your games that you either run or played in, where a player has to take a few weeks off, or is a question mark whether or not they'll be able to come back? Be anything like that, Tony?
Yeah, I have a player who I think is coming back who took a year and change off for grad school.
Oh yeah.
Just they couldn't commit. And then there were her and another player each couldn't commit to the frequency of it was every 2 weeks, but they each wanted to play 1 month. So I just said that their character was the same character who would undergo like this transformation, had like an alternate personality. And like that worked fine. It could be explained in game. I see one of the one of the comments in the Twitch chat is the magic phone booth, and I don't think that's a bad solution. To just have, you can establish some sort of character who occasionally just shows up and whisks people away. You can have like a Marut come in and summon someone for jury duty. I don't know.
Right.
Like that's it can be somewhat disruptive if you're in the middle of a combat encounter. Just because the combat may have been balanced for a different makeup. And I don't love the DM or another player running player characters for them. I just think it's a little too risky. If something goes wrong, I want the player whose character it is to be present for the thing going wrong. But between encounters, I think it's fine. I think some DMs really care about attendance, but as long as all players are making a good faith effort to attend as much as they can and just make absences the exception, then that's fine. If a player is missing, I don't know, more than half the sessions without explanation, they probably shouldn't be in the campaign, and I don't think anyone would have a problem with that.
Yeah, explanation and I mean, even without explanation, warning at least, right? I don't need to know. If we're friends, if you tell me you can't be there for a game, I mean, I might give a shit about like, why not? What's more important than being here? Yeah, well, matter of fact, my good friend Alfred, that's in my Tuesday night home game. His son is turning 4 today, and is going to skip the home game, and which is no excuse, Alfred. If you're watching, I want you to know how disappointed I am.
Yeah, kid's gonna have a birthday every year.
Exactly. He's going to have. I mean, this is the only time we're going to have this particular session. Yeah, I mean, advance notice is the thing, right? Now, on a professional level, somebody's going to be gone. Um, yeah, I went Edwin. So how do you handle it if you know players going to be coming back? For example, going on vacation for 3 weeks, same type of thing. Magic phone booth, or I mean, I do. I mean, in my home games, sometimes somebody will say, "Yeah, I'll run such and such a character." Um, there is risk to that, but I think that has to be part of the social contract, right? Which is if you're not here and you first of all you give us consent for someone to play your character, and then second, you have a preferably stated understanding with the DM that anything significantly bad, like they lost their artifact or they're dead, that those will be in whatever manner reversible because it wasn't the player that did it, right? It was a different player. So professionally, yeah, go ahead.
I use your thing all the time now, the fading into the background.
Yeah,
Like they just faded into the background. They're in combat. They're just soloing another enemy over here that's not in the tracker.
exactly.
And then, out of combat, in your Friday game, we faded back in one character to heal because it was extremely important.
Right. It was like, extremely important.
And then faded back out. All right. Thanks for the lay on hands.
Yeah. Interesting enough, it's Matt's character, that Hector, that asked the question. All right, but let's drop down into let me handle the professional DM side of the question. Then it's a case by case basis. So if I have a player that's played with me twice and then says I can't be there for the next 6 weeks, what I'm likely to do is say, all right, well we're going to go ahead and remove you from the campaign for now. When you're ready to come back, if the seat's not filled, please jump back in. If it's a player that's been with me, for a few months, or certainly in the case of Matt, who's been with me for over a year, you got to take a couple of months off because you're traveling. So be it. I'm fine with that. I'll hold your spot. And yeah, maybe I'll bring somebody in. We have a player on the Monday night game that I play in with one of my clients is a pro DM, Eddie. Eddie, player's in that game as well. It's going to be gone for some time. And basically what he's done, he's brought in another client to fill that spot, not the same character, but to fill, the spot for a few weeks while the player's gone. So there's lots of ways to approach it. It's a case by case basis. It hasn't come up much for me as a professional DM, just a couple of times. And in both cases, it's a matter of, well, yeah, we'll be here when you get back. I mean, there's the business side of it, right? Which, I don't really get into the business side of pro DMing on this stream. That's not what it's about. This is about just helping other people be good DMs, regardless of whether they're in, whether it's for clients or whether it's for their friends, whatever. I mean, but that's a question that as a pro DM you have to ask. All right, so it's a loss of income, X dollars over X amount of time. Do I have somebody temporarily fill, or how do I handle that? So, but you got to make your own business decisions. I can mentor you in your business. If you want to be a professional DM, hit me up. We'll work something out. We can offer, I've talked about doing a coaching type situation and tossed around some ideas over the last year and a half, but I feel like the industry is so new that to offer anything significant as far as a pro DM, like you want to become a pro DM, come to me and I'll train you. I think the market is still too new, too much of a cottage industry for me to really be able to tell you how to do it, because it's changing moment by moment. And somebody starting out has a very different base to start from than what I am. Completely off tangent there. But Edwin says, yes, it could also depend on where the characters are in the world. Edwin had a player go on vacation for 2 weeks while the characters were in a large city. The other characters went on an adventure in the city. When the player came back, he gave him the information on magic items for sale, and he'd be gone gathering that info. Yeah. I mean, I guess the other half of that question, as far as how you handle it story-wise, is how important is immersion to you and to your group? If they're okay with a little bit of cognitive dissonance, fading into the background is just fine, right? If they want a genuine, like, I need to be able to think through this explanation correctly, then maybe you have to do a little more work. But and neither one is wrong, right, or better than the other. I certainly lean toward the former, but if you're into the latter, that's fine too. All right. I think that covers about that. All right. So Eric asks also about third party or homebrew. He specifically says, do you have any favorite third party, aka homebrew subclasses or option that you've seen player use and thought, whoa, that's cool? If so, what are they? What are your thoughts on third party and homebrew material, Tony?
I don't like it. Specifically, what I don't like is I don't like when things are not play tested, because I think balance becomes an issue. And what I really don't like is when you implement something at the table and it's not working out and you have to take it away. That I think is a giant bummer, and sometimes a sort of deal breaker. You could lose a player over that. So yeah. I think implementing something, I've given as an example, my friend implementing the 97-page homebrew document in the latest campaign, which was a deal breaker for me. I can't handle that level of change. Maybe it's all good. Maybe it's all gold, all these changes. Probably not. And what would be better is to do it a little bit at a time. So you want to make all these changes to these spells. Can you change a couple of spells at a time? Can you want to make all these changes to the backgrounds or to the feat system? Let's just do that. Let's alter the feat system. That said, there are homebrew. I'm relatively impressed with this Rise of the Drow adventure. I think it's extremely polished. I don't know. I'm not reading it on the side, so I don't know how much you've deviated from it. But yeah, that's like a legit publication. But even that has the
story-wise, we're definitely off the rails. I will tell you that story-wise, we are definitely 100% off the rails. We're no, I'm moving shit around, but yes, it is extremely well polished, and I highly recommend it. By the way, let me give a plug for AEW Games. I can't give it. This book is very well done, and I was worried at first about the binding, it might, but I put it through the paces. It's got two these bookmarks, which I know it's literally just a piece of fabric that you can replicate with anything else, but I've always appreciated sort of those built-in bookmarks. On average, the homebrew, the third-party mechanical stuff that's here has been pretty workable, with a few exceptions, but. Yeah, shout out to Jonathan Nelson and Stephen Yardley. That it highly recommend DMs Rise of the Drow.
So
Sorry to interrupt you there. Yeah.
yeah, I think you'll find on DM's Guild with, a ton of homebrew, but some of it is much more play tested than others. Uh, Same with, there's a lot of Kickstarters, with homebrew content for D&D. And I sort of keep an eye out for, how play tested is it? And I want it play tested with players like me who are trying to exploit it as much as possible, uh, to
Right.
see what's going to happen. Something else that sort of bothers me about homebrew is like edge cases are not considered. So the I mean, spoilers for Rise of the Drow a little bit, close your ears if you're playing it. But this item that comes up early on in the campaign, Dark Skull, which my character has, is under the permanent effect of the Hollow spell. And it's like, well, it doesn't specify. The Hollow spell is a spell where you make a lot of choices. You make a choice about what the radius of the effect is, what types of creatures are affected by it, what second group of creatures gets affected by it. So you can exclude, there's 5 types of creatures that are always affected by the radius, but you can exclude certain ones of them. And then there's you could specify another group of people like followers of Lulf, which is very impactful in this adventure in particular. And then within that category, you pick any of a number of various effects. And so you get this item, and the entire description is under the effect of the Hallow spell. I was like, all right, well, which decisions were made? How do you change the configuration of that spell? Like, can you? How does dispel magic work on it? Because it's a spell, but it's an item. That's come up a couple times too. This hasn't exactly come up, but it's been in the back of my mind. We have a Twilight cleric in the party, and so when my area of darkness overlaps with Twilight Shroud, is it dark or is it dim? That really hasn't been established.
Yeah.
So that happens with homebrew where it's fun. You just sort of write this out, but it doesn't have a sort of comprehensive interaction with the rules and the other abilities that exist in the game.
Yeah, and Eric points out, he says, he's offering context too for the question. The Rashomon Thay book on DM's Guild, is decent. He says the legit books tend to be decent for subclass and some reskinned or different spells. Other DM's Guild and random D&D Beyond homebrew creations, not so much. Not play tested and normally quite broken. Yeah, I mean, okay. My very first question when I encounter anything homebrew, the very first question that I ask is, why? Why do we need this? Right? And if the answer is, well, I want a certain type of character or type of ability that isn't among the standard offerings. My response is, cool. What's different about it? Is it aesthetic? If it is, let's just reskin something else. Is it truly different, in terms of some sort of physical reality or innate characteristic? Well, then maybe we need to talk about a third party rule. So something like playing a Drider, since we're using Rise of the Drow as the example. You want to play a Drider? I'm into that. Sure. I don't really see a good reskinnable base to use for the Drider necessarily in terms of a character. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I mean, that's about as close as you could get. But I don't see a good sort of base that would just easily be reskinned. All right, so build it. Sure. But like Tony said, play test the shit out of it. And I don't mean with the same five guys. I mean, get a couple hundred people over a course of a few months to play test that shit and tweak, take all the feedback and then actually tweak and then play test a little more. You want something homebrew that's actually going to work and be relatively balanced. That's the way to do it. Now, most of us don't have the bandwidth to do that, right? We don't have the sort of the audience that's willing to sort of freely play test. Yeah, I mean, Eric, flavor is free. Reskinning, big fan. 4E D&D actually even put out Gamma World as basically a reskin of D&D, and it worked beautifully.
And even reskinning with slight modifications, like I was playing a character and I just really wanted a flame tongue sword. That's kind of what I wanted. And I'm like, and it turned into this whole thing like, well, I'm an artificer. Can I like harvest the parts from this monster? And it's like, okay, so I got a rock and I got the vocal cords, and like maybe I can create some sort of like thunder damage weapon. And then it's homebrewed into like, well, you're working on it over all these nights, and then it'll do an extra d6, but it has charges, and you can spend charges to do it, have it do one additional d6, or you could spend the charges on these spells, and at higher levels you can cast higher spells with it. And then eventually I'm like, I really just want a flame tongue. And then the DM was like, all right, how about like a flame tongue that does thunder damage? I'm like, fine. Like I just wanted the extra 2d6. That's all I wanted. But
I guess that could be.
I think this DM loves. I'm same DM. This DM loves homebrew and wants to like homebrew for the sake of homebrew because they want something fresh.
Yeah. Well,
some people want.
Sure, and that's if you like to tinker away. I don't expect me to use it. Right. I mean, that's and if I'm your DM and you want to tinker, I mean, I'm pretty clear with my players and my potential players. I'm not a fan. Reskinning is amazing. Homebrew, not so much. Yeah, Eric, player wants to throw cards like Gambit. Cool. That's what your magic missile looks like. They look like playing cards. I have a lovely group. I play with them about once a month. A couple of brothers and a couple of the sons and a girlfriend, and they're all over the world except the U.S., England, and one of the kids is on a cruise ship in South France. He works on a ship, or in the Mediterranean, I should say. Most recently in the South France. Last time we played, I believe, and then another son in Australia, and the son in Australia and his girlfriend, and this kid is awesome, just a cut up, and I mean the whole group is. I mean, my face literally hurts from smiling and laughing after playing with these guys every time. But he's a I don't know, the fish people, Lokoth. How do you say it? Lokoth? I don't know. I mean, I've been playing the game for 40 years. I don't know how to pronounce half the shit. And that's because I learned it by reading it rather than saying it. Anyway, Lokoth, fish people. And he's an artificer. And so all of his infusions in terms of flavor are excretions or something that his fish body produces. So specifically, his healing word or cure wounds, whichever it is that he has, is caviar that he's produced. It doesn't change the mechanics of the game, right? And the players absolutely love it, and I do too, because he's like, here, I'm going to heal you, but to do so, I'm going to smear these fish eggs all over you. Not just any random fish eggs, my fish eggs.
One of one of my players wants to be a tonic salesman. And like, Hay is laughing because she's in the group. But this is a player who's totally new to D&D and didn't have a sort of character completely fleshed out from the beginning. Even I as a player start with mechanics and then sort of develop personality around those mechanics. And sometimes it evolves over time. And so he's really leaning into the tonic salesman. And I didn't expect that. And I kind of built his character. And now I'm thinking, all right, I don't really want to manage the sort of crafting potions. It's not very interesting, and the rules aren't very robust in how to do that. You can craft healing potions, but now you have to search for ingredients. And it turns out what's easier is there's a feat called chef that you can make like little treats. And I could just reskin that as tonics. And now my player can do what he wants and make these healing tonics. And it's been play tested and it's totally balanced, and it's going to work great. And I think he's going to like it. And I won't have to worry about managing like resources you need to craft the healing potions, and I don't know, roll survival to see if you can find the herbs. It's so obnoxious to have to do that. So like, to be clear, the reason for reskinning is because it's already balanced. And it's just much more straightforward. And it's also kind of fair, if that makes sense. If you introduce a homebrew item and it starts to break things, other players might get upset.
Yeah, and that's both interpretations of the word balance, right? It's balance between players, but then also balance in terms of between characters and opponents.
Yeah,
mechanical balance. Yeah. All right. Okay. So what else do we have? Scroll all the way down. Too far. Yeah. So as sort of a on this question of balance, Alex Calabash asked the question: in combat, how do experienced DMs prefer to play the baddies' tactics? Are they just kind of basic and doing their own thing? Or do you like to have them really coordinate and be as smart as possible to beat the party? If the combat's going in the DM's favor, is there any feeling like, uh-oh, I better back off and figure out how the party can still win this? Kind of seems like that stuff would be even more important than CR. Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, at least with that last line. DM, how the DM runs the creatures, absolutely. It's analogous to, so you have an optimized and an unoptimized character with a power differential. The same sort of idea, it happens with monsters. A monster that is played effectively, played optimally by the DM, is probably, pick your percent, 50% maybe, more effective than one that's not played optimally by the DM. I don't know. What do you think about how do you do that? How do you approach tactics? Tony, do you base it in an immersive sense? Like, this creature has a low wisdom. There's no way he's going to know necessarily to target the wizard with concentration, for example.
Yeah, I would consider that. But I mean, I would also consider that animals in the wild with low wisdom are smart and like very good at surviving. So I think it kind of depends on the group. It's a pretty non-stated, but pretty well understood thing that the DM will kind of adjust what the baddies are doing in combat to, avoid killing a player. It's easy to come up with an excuse. Well, he's going to go after this person that just attacked him, or like he's going to go after this person that looks weak. And so you just come up with some sort of reason why they're not attacking that vulnerable character. But I play in a game where the DM is just brutal, and just plays all the enemies very optimally. But on the other hand, the DM has like an advantage that he or she or they really need to account for, which is that they have complete knowledge. They know what all the players do, and they know what all the enemies do. And the players don't always know what the enemy abilities are, and so don't know to scatter or don't know to cast such and such buff or debuff, which would be very impactful. And so to be fair, if the DM's going to play optimally, I'm a fan of when DMs, and I as a DM always do this, where I don't tell you what the enemy does until the enemy does it, and then I explain how it works. So they just breathe this thing, and now I'm like, all right, they get this occasionally recharging thing, and everybody has to succeed on a Constitution save or else you die. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I also like playing the characters somewhat brutally, and dragons are a good example where you can play a dragon that just walks around and like claws people, or you could play a dragon that flies up into the air beyond the range of arrows until the breath weapon recharges, then swoops down and destroys everybody, and then flies back up. So it's like Game of Thrones style, where you're really going to struggle taking down this dragon. Or instead of clawing you, do a grapple, which it is going to succeed because its strength is crazy, and then flies you up with its incredible flying speed, and or just like drops you off a building or whatever. So, and furthermore, if a player's down, I mean, I would think a dragon would just rip your head off. Like it's gonna keep attacking you until you're shredded, and then move on. It's not gonna be like, oh well, he's on the ground going, I'll move on. I'll look at these other guys. Like,
Yeah.
so focus fire is something that players do sort of by default. But
my players don't. Oh my God. And it drives me nuts. I'm like, you guys, it's a valid principle. Okay. Focus fire. It's a thing. It's because D&D comes down to the action economy. The opposing side has fewer actions than your side has an advantage. And the more actions that you can take away from them, the bigger your advantage. My players, on average, just don't. God bless them. I'm glad they don't. It makes combats more interesting. You talk about the DM having an advantage because he knows the characters as well as the creatures. I think there's a footnote to that that says not always the case. Because there's two things about it. First of all, most DMs, and your mileage may vary, but most DMs will not know the characters anywhere near as well as the player knows their own character. And again, there are exceptions. There are DMs who do their homework and make it their business to understand what exploits the characters are going to have. So that's the first thing. The second thing is players not only have better knowledge of their characters, but I would argue that the DMs, and on average, knowledge of the creatures isn't as extensive because it lacks the same degree of experience in being played as the player has playing their character. What I mean is, Unless you're a professional DM running 25 to 30 hours a week, and unless you run the same adventures or the same creatures anyway, multiple times, you prepare for a session. So you have that session prep time to familiarize yourself with the monster and its abilities and its tactics. And then, on average, you won't use it again, or you might use it again eventually. The very first time I ran Dragon Heist, I ran the all the NPCs and monsters much less efficiently than I'm running them now in my Dragon Heist games, because I've had the opportunity to play them over and over again now, and I know what works and what doesn't. Again, there are outliers on both sides. There are the DMs that are diligent and able to do all of that for both monsters and for their player characters. And then there are others who, really just don't sort of see things from a tactical perspective. And both are okay, but they both speak to that question.
Another thing that I realized as you were talking is that in combat, the DM's attention is very split, because not only you're controlling all the monsters, but you're trying to keep track of where all these players are. So, I've caught you a couple times where you forgot like the situation this enemy was in or something, which is entirely reasonable because you throw sometimes like 20 or more enemies on the field. So it's difficult for us, but also difficult for you. And that will be difficult for any DM, because it's just a lot of moving parts, and you do have to keep the game moving. So you can't sit there and analyze what's the best move every turn.
Yeah, pacing is a thing. The DM compared to a player, if we're talking about the amount of time that the DMs on a creature per creature basis, the amount of time that the DM has in combat versus the time an individual player has in combat is on average less. And that's by design. It should be. The players, they're the heroes. They should be taking center stage. If every monster I have takes the same amount of time that each player takes, then literally 50% of the time, it's just me. And then if you're a player, not only is 50% of the time just the DM, you have another, if there's 5 of you, another 40%, that's other players too. And so you only got 10%. So, I mean, there's some sort of there's a pacing, the issue of pacing. And that's a good topic conversation for a future show too, is pacing. How do you maintain pacing? That sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, Alex asked the question. I absolutely do the, I better back off and figure out how the party can, usually I don't say I better back off and figure out how they can win this. I don't care if they win. I'm okay if they lose. My question is I better back off and figure out how the party can survive this. Because losing is part of the game. And character death can be too. Again, that's part of the all too often unspoken social contract. Your DM, needs to be able to make that clear to players so they know what to expect. But that's another good topic for a show in the future, is the social contract side of D&D and expectations.
There was one, I mean, your viewers can look at it because it's online, but there was one combat in particular that you ran that was extremely deadly, like overwhelmingly unfairly deadly. And you're like, well, I wasn't expecting you to waltz into the maximum security prison and just guns firing. But and even in that scenario, you made clear, you're like, they're not trying to kill you, they're just going to capture you. And then some players started to surrender. But then my my character was like, no, I'm gonna
No,
figure out a way out of it.
I will not.
And I did not take out the whole prison, but I did get away with a lot of casualties on their end.
Yes, you did. No, that was definitely a fun session. All right, let's see. Next question here. And I'm going to put this one. This is another one from Eric. I'll put this one to Tony. What's your favorite monster or group of monsters to run against players for both fun and challenge, or one or the other? And then he says at each tier, right? Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that one?
I'm very partial to dragons. I really like dragons. I think they, as monsters, have a lot of flexibility in what they can do. There's so many monsters that they can do one thing. They rolled a hit, they didn't hit. Okay. That's it.
Right.
And the other thing I like about dragons is they're just, as a monster, very well understood by everybody. Everybody knows what a dragon does. It flies, it bites, it claws, it breathes fire. We've seen movies. We know this, people knew what a dragon was before D&D. Right? You get it.
Right. Well, and it's in the name. I mean, it's not called Dungeons and Hobgoblins.
And then besides that, the things I think I just gravitate toward monsters with a lot of flexibility. So any monster that can fly, teleportation is very fun. Spell casting. I would love to run. I haven't found players who want to run a tier 4, even one shot, but I would love to run a crazy character like Vecna, or I was just looking at, it was one of the ones from Eberron. It was like Sul Katesh, something like that.
Yeah.
Sul Katesh. This monster, it doesn't, I mean, it's CR28, but it doesn't look like much reading it until you see that frickin' arcane cataclysm, which is nuts. It basically creates an enormous anti-magic field that it is not affected by. So all of a sudden it's a CR28 monster that can now cast spells. It can cast fireball at will, and you can't.
Right. And you can't. And you can't.
So it doesn't even need magic resistance because you got no magic. And so, I'd be interested to run, one of these high level monsters, just to see what players can do about it.
Oh yeah.
Because I don't have a monopoly on creativity. I'd like my players surprise me.
Oh yeah, I had built I sort of tweaked, and I've several different times I've taken existing stat blocks and reskinned them as the big bads that I've wanted to use. I just had a party that they're I don't know, 15th level. They're somewhere in between tier 3 and tier 4 up there. Anyway, they had to go to Athos, Dark Sun, and the World Dark Sun, and I placed them specifically during the time prior to the overthrow of Calic, the Sorcerer King of the city of Tyr. And which is well-established lore, right? There's it's now the free city of Tyr. Calic was overthrown by his because he was betrayed by his high priest and then defeated by a combatant that from the gladiatorial arenas. And essentially, I put the characters in the midst of that, and they see now they didn't fight him directly. They did, I mean, they sort of did some, but they're on a quest to get the rod of seven parts. So they had to basically keep them occupied enough that they could grab the MacGuffin, grab the one part of the rod, and then get away. But it was so perfect because one of the bard they'd encountered the high priest earlier and beaten him in combat. And so the bard said, you know what, I'm going to just pretend to be this guy so we can get access to Calic and get the MacGuffin. And it worked out perfectly. I didn't even anticipate it. It was beautiful because the official storyline is that the high priest betrays Calic. And now Alamir Galanadel, is Alamir Galanadel of Torchel, as canon, at least in that game, it wasn't actually the high priest that betrayed Calic. It was Alamir disguised as Calic. So that was really fun. Not really, to the question of what creatures do you like to run. I like creatures, but in some ways it is. I like ones that have an interesting story or do something interesting. I don't like to run creatures that just walk up and hit things with a sword or that just cast fireball at the party. I want them to do something interesting. And maybe it's because I play a lot. I run a lot of D&D, and so I want to do something that maintains my interest, just as much as the players. And I think that works for all of us. I mean, at low levels, I tend to rely on, at tier 1, I tend to rely on, and this can vary based on the theme of the campaign, but I tend to go Goblinkin. So hobgoblins, hobgoblins, bugbears, humanoid, monstrous type humanoids. Mid-tier, I tend to go into aberrations. They're just a lot of fun aberrations, all from Norkers to not Norkers, Nothics, and of course, beholders and everything in between. There's a lot of good undead in tier 3, sort of 11 to 12 or 11 to 15 in there. And then above 15, it's whatever I can find that actually is mechanically is a challenge. Just because, again, I maintain that in 5th edition D&D, by 15th level, the CR system it's just an insufficient way of calculating challenge. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's my general answer. I know I'm not mentioning specific critters, Eric, but that can get you an idea at least. And obviously some of it depends on campaign theme, right? If it's an undead heavy theme in a campaign, if I'm playing Ravenloft, for example, there's just a shit of undead, shitload of undead. So
I tend to at early levels throw a lot of the goblins and bandits and cultists, like the usual, because I think early levels are sort of training, like familiarizing yourself with your character. And I almost as a rule, I'm not going to kill a character before level 3 or 4. Because I think it's unfair it's already really deadly. There's, I really mourn the death of a character who died at level 2 because I was really excited to play that character in this campaign that's ultimately going to level 20.
yeah,
And I could have just, but I could have just rolled an equivalent character, but I liked the name and the personality and everything.
You just have to learn. You just have to learn not to get attached to a character until fifth level or so.
Yeah. But then, if you want to, there's a CR2 monster 2 called the Intellect Devourer,
Yeah.
which is extremely deadly. Extremely deadly. It's nuts. So it depends on what you want. But maybe it's more fun for you as the DM to throw some Intellect Devourers in the cave. But I don't know, at early tiers, I would just sort of stick with the regular, sword, dagger, and bow types.
Yeah.
Maybe vary up the environment is interesting.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Always. A changing environment is always, or a terrain, environmental features always make combat more interesting. It's funny you mentioned Intellect Devourers because Dragon Heist, and I mentioned Dragon Heist because I've run it a bunch and I've got several ongoing Dragon Heist campaigns right now. And I think all of my current Dragon Heist campaigns have met the Intellect Devourer, but sort of the final encounter of, if you're using milestones before you milestone from first level to second level, includes an Intellect Devourer, which is just awesome. Yeah, I mean, I also like to use, and this isn't specific to a creature, but I like to use the parties. My players are brilliant. They are, all of them. And I like to use character type abilities as monsters. So what I mean is, for example, I'm a big fan of sneak attack damage from various NPCs and various creatures that are able to do that. Sort of following the same principles as regular sneak attack. I like counter spell and dispel magic. Counterspell and or dispel magic are on every NPC caster that you're going to face. Arcane caster, they're going to have one or both of those on their available spells, just because the party is going to have them. And that's always interesting to me because default stat blocks just don't really include counterspell, or they didn't. I haven't looked too closely at Monsters in the Multiverse. That was certainly something that they could have potentially improved with that new release. I don't know if they did or not. But
the Vecna stat block that was just released has this dread counterspell ability.
Ooh, yeah.
Which have you read that?
Yes, I have. It is, yes.
So like it does fourth level or lower, it cancels.
Yep.
And if it succeeds, you take psychic damage for having had the
exactly.
audacity to cast a spell.
Yeah. Yeah. Now which is pretty cool. Now he does have to see the creature casting the spell, so
but he has true sight.
He does. Well, spells without somatic or verbal. Verbal, you can at least see the mouth casting. And then subtle spell. Subtle spell, of course, can get around it, but costs a sorcery point, and not everybody's got those. All right, well, I think we're gonna close it down for the day. Thank you so much, especially to everybody watching, but especially to Eric and Ed, Wynn, and everybody else watching at home. Be sure and tune in next week when we will be discussing, I don't know, maybe let's, what were the two things I said earlier that we should discuss in the future? Do you remember, Tony?
One was pacing, you said.
Pacing. Let's talk about pacing next week. We'll take some of your questions. Folks, be sure and just shoot me your questions on socials or however you want to communicate with me, everything is DM Bob Yo. All the email, all the social media, that's really all you need to know. DM Bob Yo. Just add the occasional com before it. If you want to send me money, there's a dollar sign you can put before it. But, I mean, I'm easy to contact. So, all right, everybody have a good week. Tony, as always, thank you for your time and words of wisdom. And we'll see everybody next time around.